Greetings, everyone. My name's Carol Folt, and I'm Dartmouth's interim president. And it's my pleasure to welcome you all here and to thank you for joining us. This is our 17th talk in the Leading Voices in Higher Education lecture series. And you know, that is an incredible accomplishment because this is a series that we began when we started strategic planning. And we found two things out when we started it. The first is that we thought we are going to try to get the names of all the people thinking, as many people as we can, taking a broad look at the future of higher education. And so we thought we will try everyone. Our first wonderful surprise, I think, was that everybody we asked said yes. And I'll tell you why I think they said yes for a really important reason. Because this isn't something that is just happening at Dartmouth. This is really a big frontier in the country. And the people that are working day in and day out on the trends and the changes in learning, the way we think about higher education, how we can really use the technologies that are changing to expand our capacity, how we can think about how we can reach more people, create new knowledge. That is really exciting stuff. And when you go to people who are spending their energy and their creative juices on that, and you say, we're inviting you to our campus because we want to learn with you, people agree to come. So that was wonderful. Then our next fear was, will the campus really come? And you know, I also will say there, we have been really pleased to see so many people come, and it's been such a wonderful combination of students and faculty and staff and community members. So thank you all for being here, and today is another wonderful part of that lecture series. And I think we've all found that we've been really learning a lot. We've been talking about the rise of global education marketplace. We've looked at innovation, innovation through diversity, innovation in different ways of teaching, the innovation in different ways that colleges and universities can even be organized. We've been talking a lot about technology and how technology can enable teaching and can also be used to enhance learning. But we've also talked about what the limits might be on these new ideas. Today's speaker, Amanda Lenhart, is a policy expert and Pew Research specialist whose expertise lies in that category of technology-enabled teaching and learning, at least the expertise that she's using today in this lecture. In her research, she's focusing on the behavior of the students who are younger than the ones we're used to having at Dartmouth, primarily looking at teens and children. And of course, the fact is that these young people, especially in the spirit of this whole series and our entire strategic planning enterprise, are really the students of the future. These are the 17s, the 18s, the 19s, the 20s. And if you'll remember back to Saul Kahn, or you'll remember back to Ray Kurzweil, that's really what they focused on. That if we spent all our thinking, first of all, if we spent our strategic thinking about what we did, we're going to have a little bit of a problem trying to immediately understand even what our students now want to do. And that can also be a bit of a problem if we try to use that thinking by itself to anticipate what the students of the future are going to do. And in fact, we might not even know what they already can do, what their capacities are. So this is very exciting for us. It frees us our time horizon to look both at the best of the past and try to anticipate what can be exciting about the future. In a recent interview, Amanda said that, quote, the changing technology environment is shaping and being shaped by youth. That's another exciting advance in this, is that these are very interactive. We have the power to engage immediately and change in real time. Today, she's going to talk with us about the implications of this trend for campus life, students' connections to home, as well as technology's impact on the learning process and on the way some students, at least, are shaping their own expectations for the future. Her research and her knowledge of youth and their use of technology has been very important to many people. Amanda has testified before a congressional subcommittee, the FTC, the U.S. State's Attorney General. She's appeared on NPR and PBS. I'm sure many of you will have heard from her or of her. She graduated magna cum laude from Amherst College with a double major as many students here would be similar to do. Hers was in English and anthropology. She earned her master's with distinction from Georgetown University in communications, culture, and technology. I think we've got to all really love this title and that wonderful photograph. She's going to be talking to us today. How do they even do that? And I ask myself that all the time. Today's technology is shaping tomorrow's students. Please join me in welcoming Amanda Lenhart.
Thank you. Oh, let me turn this on. Here we go. Take the mic to the bathroom with you. So thank you, Carol. It was a lovely introduction. I'm delighted to be here. I'm particularly delighted to be here because I owe my existence, in fact, to Dartmouth College. My parents met at Dartmouth at the Winter Carnival in 1967 on a blind date. So thank you. I appreciate it. I didn't ask them about what they did, anything like that. The phone broke up, but it's a fun little family tidbit. But today I want to talk about how teens are really using technology today. I want to talk about, as Carol suggested, how that then has implications for campus life and how that has implications for life in the classroom. And this title for the talk today, that quote at the beginning is actually the voice of a young woman. Actually, she's speaking in the voice of her parents. And her parents have actually just seen her text messaging bill. This was the bill where she had texted 3,000 messages in a month, and her parents could not fathom how a single individual could do that. And I think, while that's actually an anecdote that's a couple years old now, and most parents who know what they're doing have unlimited text messaging for their students, it, I think, does capture a sense of wonder that some of us have, those of us who have adolescents in our home and in our lives, and those of us who don't, about how they use the technology. It seems amazing. And what I want to do is I want to unpack it a little bit. I think there are things that are mysterious about how teens use technology, but I think sometimes it's not quite as mysterious as we think it is. So just a little bit about me. The Pew Research Center is a nonpartisan, we call ourselves a fact tank to distinguish ourselves from partisan think tanks, a research organization in DC. We do high quality objective data. The data I'm including today, where it's data from Pew, is all from nationally representative work, but I'm including a lot of other data, qualitative, quantitative. This talk really pulls together a wide variety of material. And ultimately, this presentation will be available online should you wish to download it later. So I want to start out by talking about the technological environment of today's teens. So what are they living in? And I also want to talk about historically. We have this sense of like, well, of course, everybody knows what a cell phone is. And do you remember that first time you saw somebody walking down the street and you thought they're crazy because you didn't see the cell phone on the other side of their head? Now, some of you who are older will probably laugh, and other people are like, what are you talking about? Of course, people have always had cell phones. So I want to contextualize that. It's a little bit like our Beloit list for technology. And I'm going to focus on networked technologies. And in order to do that, we're going to use the device of Elizabeth. Elizabeth is 17 years old. She'll be 18 in June. And she will be a first-year college student in the fall of 2013. What kind of technology did Elizabeth grow up with? What kind of technology does she use now? And furthermore, I want to talk a little bit about the disruptions of these innovations. I think disruption is a big term we hear being thrown around in the higher education space, that higher ed as we know it is being disrupted. But technology has been disrupting us for the past, it's been disrupting us, in fact, since technology began, whether it's the wheel or the printing press. But these disruptions are coming at a greater and greater, a quicker and quicker pace. And so I want to talk about the ways in which these technologies that have come into these kids' lives are also disruptive forces. So Elizabeth was born in 1995. Let that sink in for a second. Email is 27 years old the day she's born. Today, 67% of teens use email, and that's down from a high of around 85% earlier. And it's not that teens don't use email. They do, as you can see, 2/3 of them have an email account. It's more weighted towards older teens than younger teens. It's that they don't actually check it very often, and that's something that those of you who are trying to reach teens are sadly, I'm sure, aware of. PCs, personal computers, are 20 years old on 1995. Today, 93% of teens have access to a desktop or laptop at home. Often that's a shared device. Often it's not their computer, but they have that access. And the thing to take away from this, the big sort of disruption of this technology, which is actually massive, is it makes computing personal, right? The computer now sat on your desk instead of off in its own room where it rumbled. For those of you who have seen the War Games, the movie, remember Whopper, the computer that plays the war game? This is making a computer intimate. Email, suddenly you could send messages quickly. It also is the beginning of sort of rapidity of communication. No longer does it take 5 days to send a letter to somebody. Now it can be transmitted in 5 seconds. So that's the beginning. So in 1995, commercial cell phones were 17 years old, not really widely distributed until really a couple of years after Elizabeth is born, but still, really, this is when people were really starting to adopt them. They probably looked something like this in the picture, maybe a little bit bigger. Today, 78% of teenagers have a cell phone, and that's actually quite evenly distributed across socioeconomic factors. It is not evenly distributed by age, so younger teens are much less likely to have a phone than older kids. Basically, if you're 12, you don't have a phone, you get one on your 12th birthday or when you enter middle school, and then it's a sort of a ramp up there through high school. And to talk about, again, the disruption of the mobile phone is actually massive. It is on par with the PC. But the things I think to really take away here, which we'll talk about more in a second, is that mobile is really, it changes our relationship to information. Suddenly, when you have a mobile phone, you want your information now. You want it in relation to the place where you are. So instead of just being content with having your desktop and having your desktop know where it is on the network, suddenly you have this device that is roaming around, and you're in Altoona and you want to know where the restaurants are, and you're in Kentucky and you want to know where the restaurants are. And suddenly the mobile phone changes your relationship to your expectations of access to information. It also changes your expectation of access to people. Suddenly, you expect to be able to reach people pretty much all the time. Now, there is gatekeeping. You have now a caller ID wherever you go. But the mobile phone is really quite important in changing how we stay in touch. And I think we'll talk about how that manifests itself on the college campus a little bit later. The World Wide Web is 5 years old, the year that Elizabeth is born. And right around her time of birth, we started having the first, it says great browser, but it really should say the first graphical browser. This is when the web had pictures. Before that, it was text. It wasn't nearly as interesting or as exciting. This is when it really begins to take off. And the difference here, World Wide Web lays over top of the internet. The internet is what kind of transmit the connections. The web itself is the documents or information that are linked together. The other innovation here is hypertext, taking away linearity in the ways in which we think about how to access information. Instead of just reading through to the end, finding the citations, and then going to the next item, reading through, finding the citations, maybe it's like digital footnoting. And suddenly you can click on a link and rabbit away from the content that you were accessing and move on and follow your bliss through information in ways you were never able to before. So today, 95% of teens are using the internet. It really is a dominant medium. Those who don't use it, about half of them have used it in the past, and for some reason, either they got in trouble, their parents took it away. They anticipate using it again in the future, and then there's a small percentage of sort of total refuseniks. Many of them are homeschoolers, otherwise sort of outside of the realm of the mainstream. But by and large, you could pretty much expect that most adolescents are using the internet. So during Elizabeth's toddler years, we had the Palm Pilot. Does anybody remember those? Sort of a digital organizer, digital address book. But it's here because it's really the proto-smartphone. It's about miniaturization and digitization. And when you overlay this with phone connectivity, you get the smartphone. And so that's why we're talking about that here today. During her toddler years in preschool is when we had the beginning of blogging. And blogging, interestingly, has really sort of seen its peak, particularly in a text mode for adolescents. blogging is really about the democratization of voice, of the opportunity to have your voice be heard. It takes away the sort of all-consuming role, the sort of the lockdown role of the gatekeepers, whether that's the mainstream media, whether it's suddenly, you know, the New York Times suddenly doesn't control who gets to say and who gets to have their voices be heard. So blogging brings that opportunity, and it brings it to adolescents because it's very difficult. They often don't have the opportunity to share their thoughts, to share their voices, and blogs really gave them that chance. Now, this is our last number on blogging. It is 3 years old. We haven't asked about it recently. It's pretty low. At its height, it was about a third of teens said they had a blog or had kept a blog. And about 35 to 40% of teens said that they read them. So certainly something that in 2009, 2007, even earlier 2004, more teens were actually engaged with this. So in first grade is when Wikipedia started, 2001. So again, just think about this. Like imagine that you can really hardly remember school at all without Wikipedia. Today, 70% of online youth use Wikipedia. This is actually a youth number, not a teen number. This is 18 to 24-year-olds. We haven't asked this question of youth. But again, Wikipedia, I think, is important for us here today because it's the beginning of crowdsourcing, the idea that knowledge can be improved by multiple people working on it all in the same time, giving people access and the ability to change information in ways that you can follow. And that, I think, is, and obviously Wikipedia has a lot of other implications, but it's why we're talking about it here today. This is really a critical one. In the middle of elementary school, so roughly third, fourth grade, for Elizabeth, we have, and again, this is your incoming freshman class. Basically cannot remember middle school, cannot remember the end of elementary school without Facebook. They weren't necessarily allowed to use it, though they probably really wanted to. MySpace was the first one. Actually, it wasn't the first one. The first one was a little one whose name escapes me at the moment, but it was the precursor to Friendster. Then there was Friendster, for those of you who remember back in the day. Friendster had its ascendancy and it dropped down, and then MySpace came a few years later. MySpace itself had its peak. It is now in the doldrums. Almost no one uses it. Facebook truly has the vast market share. 82% of teens use social networking sites. That is, the people who aren't included in that number tend to be the 12-year-olds who are not permitted on them by various laws, even though half of them use them anyway. But Facebook is really the dominant. If you are using social media, 90% of teens have a Facebook page. We can talk more about Facebook's future. We're not going to go into great depth. We've done some focus groups that suggest in this school year, Facebook is being used less. It's not going away. It's being used less, and it's being replaced with other technologies that we'll talk about in a second. This is the one that always gets me. Elizabeth is in fourth grade. YouTube did not show its face until 2005. I can't believe how recent it is, given how incredibly integrated it is into so many facets of our life. And teens, they are participating in it. 27% have recorded and uploaded videos. It's video chatting, streaming video live to the internet. And this is really made possible by broadband, by the fact that in the mid-2000s was when suddenly broadband became cheap and available to a lot of people. Without broadband, video does not happen. And so that is why YouTube was able to kind of capture a particular moment in time, and why we now have the kind of bandwidth that allows us to look at video on our phones and to look at video in a lot of different contexts. Twitter. Ah, yes, Twitter. So Twitter, I include this here partly because it's really important and because in many cases we're starting to see a shift away from Facebook onto Twitter. That number, the 24% of teens who use Twitter, is low in my opinion. That's from the last summer, and this school year we're seeing a transition to Twitter amongst adolescents. This is Twitter, for those of you who don't, everybody knows what Twitter is, right? Anybody not have a good sense of what Twitter is? That's fine to raise your hand. You will not be mocked, I promise. Or maybe a little bit. Twitter is about brevity, Twitter is about simplicity, and Twitter also takes the sort of synchronous nature out of social media. So when you have Facebook, you have to be friends with the other person in order to see their content and engage with them in any way. Twitter, you don't have to do that. People can follow you, you can follow people. It allows for relationships with celebrities, with famous other people. It allows for people to have kind of a one-to-many relationship. And teens love it because their parents aren't there yet. And so it feels more private and it feels simpler and easier. Twitter's other virtue is that it has great scannability. Because it confines you to 140 characters, you embed your information in links. You embed your information in ways that a person can dive more deeply or they can skim across the surface. It also doesn't come with an expectation that you've seen it. If you announce that you're getting married on Twitter, nobody's like comes back to you and is like, I didn't see you were getting married. Well, I posted it on Twitter. Why didn't you see it? Whereas you might get that on Facebook. Well, why didn't you see that I posted it on Facebook? So there's different expectations about how you would engage with information on these various sites. Tumblr. So Elizabeth is in 6th grade when Tumblr was founded, and Tumblr, today about 5% of teens use Tumblr, and that's a number that was volunteered. So we didn't ask them specifically, do you use Tumblr, but we said, what kind of social media do you use? And 5% of teens say, I use Tumblr. Usually it's used in conjunction with other social media, and Tumblr is effectively blogging 2.0. It takes blogging and this opportunity to have a voice and to kind of curate information, and it makes it incredibly visual. As you can see, Tumblrs tend to be, they're not entirely, but tend to be dominated by images, and sometimes also GIFs, but we won't talk about that. But Tumblr is a visual medium, and that is actually the direction in which we're moving. We started with a graphical browser, and we are moving more and more visual as we go on. And I had a slide about Pinterest in here, but I took it out. How many people know what Pinterest is? Okay, anybody who's under 18 who knows what Pinterest is? Yeah, so that's what we find in our focus groups. Nobody under 18 uses Pinterest. We have 1% of teens who even have some kind of recognition of it. It's basically used by women between the ages of roughly 25 and 45. So it's fascinating and it's awesome and it's really visual and cool, but teenagers don't use it. This is another one, Foursquare. So Elizabeth's in 8th grade. She's 14, so just a couple years ago when Foursquare came to being. And Foursquare is a geolocation app that allows you, with your mobile phone, to check in when you're someplace. It takes your physical presence and it puts it up digitally. It also creates a kind of a game style with it as well, where you can become the mayor of some place if you check in enough times. And it's the beginning, and now this geolocation has been incorporated into other types of social media. But this is the beginning. And geolocation, I think, also is important as we start thinking about the campus and think about some of the other ways in which that allows us to sort of display where we are, but has issues around security and safety as well. As you can see, about 6% of teens check in with their location. Teens are actually not super comfortable with geolocation apps because they've had it drilled into their brains ever since basically early elementary school that bad people will come and get you if you put your information up on the internet. So don't ever let anybody know where you are or how old you are. And so with that, we have a pretty low uptake of anything that displays your information, at least semi-publicly, about where you are. Even if it's just to your friends, most teens don't have a great appetite for it. I think that changes once we sort of leave the nest, and I'd be very interested to hear in the questions and answers about your experiences with that, and actually with your experiences with any of these technologies, and your own use and the use of the teens that you know, and the college students that you know, and the ways you see differences between high school and college, because I think there are really big ones, but I would love to have this be a conversation about that. Instagram, again, this next move into increasing visual. I only include this because this is the other place teens are going when they flee Facebook. They go to Instagram because it's easy and it's simple and my parents aren't there and I can send cool photos. 11% of teens use Instagram. It's like the second it's basically below, it's Facebook, MySpace, and then Instagram in terms of popularity. 3% say it's that they use it the most often of social networking sites, and that's Facebook is the most dominant there again, but Instagram is quite high on the list. And again, this came about in 2010, so these technologies are really, in the grand scheme of things, they're quite new. And my favorite, Snapchat. So this is our last one. Snapchat is so new we don't actually have any youth data on it because the last time we did a data collection, we're like, oh, Snapchat, nobody's using it. And we were wrong. We should have asked about it. So this is actually a Snapchat that she captured and then posted on Flickr, which is where I found it under a Creative Commons license. But for those who don't know, Snapchat is thought to be sort of the sexting app where you can take a naked picture of yourself and it'll disappear. They're ephemeral apps, self-destructing apps, some people call them. It's basically where you send an image and you set a particular period of time in which that image is visible and then it self-destructs, in theory. Obviously, it's not perfect, and it's supposed to tell you when somebody screen captures the image you just sent them, but there are obviously workarounds, and you're not always notified. So it's problematic, but what we found and what we've found in the focus groups that we've done in this spring is that it's mostly used for taking pictures that you don't want to have to add to the curated sort of self-portrait of yourself that you've created in social media. And that's actually a really important point, and one that we haven't really talked about the sort of disruptive nature of social media, is that it requires you to create this presence. And when we're adults, I think we have a relatively good sense of self, so creating that sense of presence online may not be that challenging. But when you're playing with your identity, figuring out who you are, and discarding identities right and left. So I have a 15-year-old stepdaughter, and we had this conversation last night before I came, in which she's like, oh, you know, have all these t-shirts and they have like Snoopy on them, and I'm not that anymore, right? So, and for her this was about sartorial choices, but digitally we have this as well. And it's a lot of pressure. They are worried about what you think, particularly the admissions folks who I see in that row. They care, they are worried. And so they want to be sure that they project the right image to you, and to their parents, and to the church lady who friended them, which is part of why they don't want to be on Facebook anymore. And so Snapchat is this opportunity to share something that's fun, that's silly, that's unflattering, but that your best friend will think is funny. You know, to take an ugly self-portrait of yourself making a funny face and sending it to your friend knowing it will disappear and that your friend probably won't go to the trouble to capture it, and if they do, it's probably not a big deal. But for the most part, it's not going to join the corpus of pictures of you that exist online. And that's why apps like this are really popular right now. So to sort of wrap up broadly what we've just talked about, to kind of take a step back, this actually is going to involve some adult data. But so we're going to take the last 12 years, because that's how long the Pew Internet Project has been in existence. So in 2000, when we first started looking at the internet, and let's remember, Elizabeth, our person here, she was 4. So Elizabeth doesn't really even remember this, but we as adults, we started out with an internet that only about half of adults actually used. Nobody had broadband, so you couldn't do video. Everything was wired. You couldn't move it around. You had to sit at a desk to engage with the internet. There was no social networking sites. And about half of people had a cell phone. Information flowed to you. You consumed it. It was posted. You didn't interact with it very much. And it was a very kind of one-way, stationary, consumptive activity. And in 2012, things are really, really different. Mobile devices, in particular, have really fundamentally changed. Mobile and social have really fundamentally changed the way we interact with technology. It's changed how we deal with relationships. It's changed also the relationship between information and time and space, as it says on there, that we expect our information to be available in very different, much quicker, and much different ways. Today, 82% of adults have, US adults use the internet. 2/3 have broadband. Most adults have a cell phone. Almost half have a smartphone. And with teens, it's about 2 in 5 have a smartphone. 19% have a tablet. About 24% of teens have a tablet. E-readers are also increasingly popular. I think these numbers are that number's a little bit old. And we're wireless, right? We use the internet anywhere, on laptops, on tablets, on desktops. We're not chained to the wire any longer. Sometimes we are. Desktops at work, certain, the old office setup, the computer that everybody grumbles when they have to use. But for the most part, our computing comes with us, and that changes our relationship to it. Our computing has become more personal. It's become in some ways more private. For an adolescent who is a cell mostly, which is actually a substantial portion of teenagers, you don't actually, as a parent, ever interact with how they are interacting with the internet. They can be surfing pornography. They can be surfing sites about, gay and lesbian issues. They can be surfing sites about colleges, and you don't know, and that's up to them. So that's a difference that we're seeing with these kinds of technologies. So that's our scene setting. The sort of move to the mobile and the social, and teens basically growing up not really remembering a lot of stuff that we think were totally radical innovations. So how is this really changing campus life and culture? And so the first thing I want to talk about is the way it changes the formation of relationships on campus. And this is really going to focus on social media in particular. And that's, so this is a quote from Dana Boyd, who is a dear friend of mine and another brilliant researcher. She has been doing some research, a bunch of qualitative research, where she goes and interviews students. And she was talking to a group about a bunch of seniors who were about to go off to college. And they were telling her about the ways in which they learned about their acceptance to college and immediately started going places where they could try to meet other people going to the same college, probably College Confidential, is my guess, but perhaps also Facebook. And they started to, as soon as they could get access to other students they knew would be in the class, to try to create relationships, ask for roommate transfers, look for people to be roommates with. And it was, in fact, really wonderful for these students. They felt like they already had this sort of sense of relationships and community even before they set foot on campus. But the other point that Dana makes, which I think is really, really important, is that colleges actually do a bunch of social engineering. They bring people together who are different. And that's incredibly valuable to the college community and to the society at large, right? That we get to meet people who are different from us and who have different experiences. And by using these social media, we tend like towards like. She uses homophily as the term, but that we look for people who are more like us, and that's a tendency that we should in some ways fight against. And that technology is kind of re-engineering some of those relationships that the admissions office and that the dean of housing and the dean of students actually work pretty hard to create. And that's, I think, a really important difference. It also changes the investment, I'll go back, in the campus community. Because we have all the social media, we have that phone, and we've had that phone for a while. So teenagers are used to calling their mothers a lot, calling their best friends a lot, texting their ex-boyfriend or their new girlfriend a lot. And that behavior doesn't change when they step on campus. And those relationships can be a lifeline, but they can also take away from the formation of a robust campus community. Because when the going gets tough, that fourth week of your first year when you are so lonely and nobody wants to eat dinner with you and you are just off by yourself and it's hard. Or your first, you don't necessarily seek support on campus, you seek support immediately from this built-in, automatic, with you all the time network of people. And so that is another, again, tendency which I think is different and changing the ways in which youth potentially create relationships and community on campuses. I don't think certainly the campus has the benefit of being the place. You are there. People are walking past you. You are physically located near this community of people. But you have this really close digital community of people as well, and that's powerful. Particularly for teens who often in their lives don't have the opportunity to go and move about in space freely. They don't have access, maybe they don't have access to a car or a driver's license. Maybe there's not good public transportation. They can't meet their friends. They're not allowed to go out into the neighborhood because it's not safe. Parents don't let kids roam. So there's not necessarily the opportunity to meet people in person that you had before. So you're used to taking your social life into the digital space. And so I think colleges have to work a little bit against that to recreate that opportunity to create a physical community, to create a community in a physical space. It also, technology changes our relationship to place, which I think this is one of my favorite slides. But so I'm talking about augmented reality, which sounds like, woo, totally out there, but it's not. Google Glass, which is weird, and which people who wear it probably look a little weird right now, but it's coming, right? This is augmented reality. It's a screen where you can see, you can swipe, you can give it commands, it takes video, it takes audio, it fetches things for you. It basically does everything but make you a peanut butter and jelly sandwich. And it takes, but augmented reality beyond that, we have it. If you have a smartphone, you have it. You can download, what's it called? Wikitude. It's a browser that overlays, it uses your camera and it overlays information over the things that you are taking a photograph or video of at the time. It merges data and your individual location with a physical place. So it's layers of information. And that has a lot of really potentially kind of radical changes. It changes how you create, so augmented reality, when you can find out where are people, it's Saturday night, where is everybody? oh, look, I can look on the map and see where everybody's just checked in using Foursquare or some other device. Everybody's over there at the pub. I'm going to go and join that party. Or I can see that there's something going on. It changes how you, and it also allows you to have happenstance. You're walking along and suddenly, oh, it pings on that your Grindr app says that, you know, that guy you had your eye on in chemistry class is actually down the street, and maybe you guys can go and meet for stuff. Grindr is an app used by gay men to meet other men for various romantic or friendship purposes. And it's extremely popular. And it is focused exclusively right now in the gay community. They've tried to create one for heterosexuals. It's not been that successful. But anyway, so what I'm saying is that it's here. You can actually download these onto your phones. So it changes potentially how you organize your social space and how you organize your social time. It also changes the ability to track people in time and space. You know, you can follow your ex around campus on the thing that they gave you access to, or maybe you have their password because you were so in love and you weren't going to use that password and then you did. And so I think there's a lot of ways in which it has safety issues and issues around stalking and tracking. It also has issues around loss of control. So an institution gets to clip the grass, and you can pull out the sign and wash the wall, but somebody else can come into the digital space and overlay now over the picture of the place that somebody sees as they walk around your campus. It could be a memorial to somebody. It could be a protest sign that you don't like. It could be a commercial sign for the coffee shop in town that now, you know, is plastered across the front of the picture of your admissions office. So, you know, this is what potentially is happening in the future, the ways in which you may not have control about sort of how your physical place is digitally represented. So there's a lot of really interesting things that I think augmented reality changes. And again, even the mobile phone, which is this very lightweight way of doing this, even just text messaging, the ability to find people quickly in space and to connect with them without having to make prior plans. I mean, that seems almost like 5 years ago, but I think that is the precursor to these things that we've just been talking about. So now I want to switch. So, I mean, that was not exhaustive, obviously. There's a lot of other things we could talk about, but those are the things that, for me, were quite important and I thought most interesting to take to you here today. And so we've been talking about the people, right? We've talked about the teenagers, and now we've talked about the place. And now we're going to talk about what brings those two together, the education. So I want to talk about, again, how technology changes expectations around learning and learning environments. And we're going to do that by talking about how teens are using technology in the classroom, as the classroom right now, and then what that potentially means for the future. So first, I want to talk about when technology is the classroom. And by this, I'm talking about massive courses, open courseware, distance learning, taking the learning into the online space, where you physically go there, not physically, you digitally go there to learn. And so they're known as MOOCs. It's kind of a hot term in the higher ed world. And one of the things I wanted to do, actually, when thinking about this particular talk, was I said, you know, how many K12 students actually have experience with distance learning? And it turns out the answer is not very many at all. About 3% of K12 students have some experience with distance learning. And the funny part is that the majority of them, it was 62%, I believe, were doing it for remediation. So they had failed a class in high school and then have been sent down to the janitor's closet with a couple of computers to take another chance at the English class they failed with 2 other kids who also failed it. So it's not, and in fact, I would argue that those are probably not the people who need that kind of learning. They, in fact, probably need more hands-on rather than less hands-on. But the kids who are going to walk through Dartmouth stores are not necessarily the kids who have a lot of experience with distance learning. Yeah?
Is that anybody who's ever used Khan Academy, or this is like enrolled in a course?
This is enrolled in a course, generally through a school, and when you add in virtual schools, it's about 4%. The 3% doesn't include virtual schools. And this data is from INACOL, which is the, I'm going to forget what the acronym stands for, but it's basically an online learning association, and this is the data that they've collected. So, and it comes from reasonably reputable sources, but that's where I got these numbers. The thing where I think technology is the classroom is a little bit more, thank you, that's a great clarification. And if anybody has other clarification questions, please raise your hand, that's totally awesome, is blended learning. And that's where perhaps you go online to get a portion of your class, but then actually meet in person for another portion of your class. And we'll talk a little bit more about that, about how that might work. And then the other place where technology is the classroom, I think, really has an important impact is around self-directed learning. And I don't think we think about that as much, but it's a really important part of learning that doesn't get as much attention. There's some folks at the University of California at Irvine, headed up by Mimi Ito, who have a whole research center where they do qualitative work talking to kids about how they do stuff that interests them digitally. And that can be producing material, that can be becoming experts on things. And so she spends a lot of time thinking about this. And she talks about the ways in which kids love to learn about things that they're interested in. And in particular, I think the important part here is these things are low risk, low stakes. I want to go online and learn how to play the guitar. I can do it. I don't have to tell anybody I'm doing it. If it gets boring, I can stop. If it turns out I'm terrible at playing the guitar, I can stop. I don't have to keep going. But if I'm really excited by it, I can take this and I can take it other places. But it's an opportunity to try things out and to pace it myself and to direct it myself. And I think that's actually what the second quote really does, is it emphasizes the ways in which teens want this to be both social, where they can have their friends participate and meet other people who are interested, which the web does very, very well, but also where they can actually direct it themselves, and it's not a curriculum that's laid out for them, which they must follow to the letter, but it gives them much more flexibility and freedom. The web is wonderful at doing that, and teens really do take great advantage of it. We don't have hard numbers on this. Mimi suggests it's about a quarter to a third of teens. We modestly measured this when we looked at people creating content broadly, and that could be blogging, it could be making movies, it could be doing a variety of things. We found about a third of teens had some experience doing that. But this is another way in which teens who might not have comfort with this kind of immersive online learning in a traditional school setting might have actually had some experiences in learning in a digital environment. So then we want to talk about technology in the classroom, which is, I think, a little bit more what we think about when we think about technology education. And I'm sorry, this is probably totally difficult to read, but this comes from a recent report by my colleague, Kristen Purcell, where she interviewed AP and National Writing Project teachers. So this is not necessarily representative. It is only representative of those teachers who I would say are working in kind of relatively elite classrooms, and reasonably well distributed across socioeconomic status, but kids who are potentially going to be walking through your doors. And this is the kind of technology they have in the classroom. And if you look at it, it's not that exciting. It's not, I look at this and I think, really? I mean, a projector, okay. Okay. I mean, we've had projectors of various kinds. That doesn't seem that radical. Of course, 97% have it. A computer lab or workstation for computer student to use. Okay, that seems like what you would have in like 1992. A cell phone or a smartphone, that is where we start to get a little bit interesting. A computer or laptop cart, not so exciting. A digital camera other than a cell phone, okay, we're getting a little bit more interesting. A video recorder, we are potentially bringing in multimedia. Interactive whiteboard. Okay, about half of teens and half of teachers say, I have an interactive whiteboard. We don't actually know how much they use it. In a second, we'll look at what they are doing, and I'm not sure they're using the whiteboards. E-book readers and tablets also starting to be in the classrooms. E-book readers are actually higher than I would have thought, and I'm hopeful that they're replacing those absolutely like abusively large textbooks we have our teens carry around. And so then we ask them, what are your students actually doing? Right? What are you doing with the technology in the classroom? And again, I have to say, it doesn't seem like we're pushing the envelope here. I think the message is that the average American high school, it's trying to bring the technology in, but they're still focused on the box. They're still focused on the classroom, on people in the seats. I used this analogy when talking with Carol earlier today. Somebody once told me that the American school is like going on an airplane. You tell kids to sit down, buckle up, and turn off your electronic devices. And that's really what their experiences are. So on this one, the first three are like, that seems like consumption. It doesn't seem very creative. It's like, I'm going to access assignments. I'm going to do some research. I mean, that's pretty classic. And we're going to talk a little bit more about research in a second. We start to get interesting when we talk about developing or posting or working on other content. That's where it gets creative and exciting. And we see about 40% of these teachers who in many cases, particularly the National Writing Project teachers, get a lot of training in how to use technology creatively for writing purposes across the curriculum. So it's not just English teachers, it could be music teachers or science teachers or math teachers, and learning how to incorporate writing into their classes. Online discussions, I think that, that's another step in the right direction. And then when we start to get into peer editing, these are the places where American high schools can really start to do things with technology. But if you look, the numbers are not that high. Your average kid is not necessarily going to have a lot of experience with this in the classroom. So one of the ways in which we bring technology into the classroom is this other new buzzword in education, which I think is also in higher ed as well as in K-12, called BYOD, or bring your own device. But it really should be BYOM, bring your own mobile, because that in practice is what it is. And bring your own device is really acknowledging what's already going on, which is that kids are bringing these devices whether or not you ban them or tell them to turn them off. They're bringing them to the school anyway. They're using them in the classroom to send text messages and do all sorts of stuff. So you might as well harness it and use that to make learning more interesting. Unfortunately, I think this picture probably sums up about how often it gets used creatively, right? So it's used to time the experiment, not super thrilling. So here we actually have data on what teens are doing with the cell phones in the classroom. And again, we're not getting that interesting. The part for me that seems the most exciting is when we get down to this 11% are texting in class with a teacher or other student as a part of a class assignment. I've heard of people using them for spelling tests. You have to text the word as quickly as possible, correctly as possible to the teacher, and then whoever gets it in fastest gets a particular number of points, and if you get it correct, you get a particular number of points. That's also gamification of the classroom, but we're not really going to talk much about that. And then this use of online cell phone platforms. So Selly is a platform that allows you to create kind of on the fly, quick, small social networks using a mobile phone, where you just simply text your number to a main number and it adds you to that network. And you can do this, and I've heard of teachers doing this, where you create literally a social network based on a book that you're reading, and each of you creates a profile in the social network as one of the characters in the book, as a way of using that to understand and explore ideas around character, but engaging it and using the technology as a way to make that more engaging. That's where I think we're starting to get interesting. But again, not a ton of really interesting use, even in these classrooms where teachers are trained and engaged, and where the students, in theory, are engaged and relatively high achieving. So another big buzzword in education is the flipped classroom. And so for those who don't know what it is, the traditional classroom is what I'm doing really today, is lecturing at you, and then you go home and you do work or you have a lab off on the side. The flipped classroom says, your homework is to watch this lecture video. And maybe if you went to Sal Khan's lecture, that's part of what he offers, right? Lectures on a particular topic. You can go at your own pace, so you can stop and start, you can take notes. If the teacher goes too fast, you can slow it down, and you can take your questions with you to get answered the next day. Then you come into class and you do a hands-on activity. You have a conversation. You do group work. The teacher can then work more individually with individual students. It's more personalized learning. Doesn't work for everything. Not every class or every lesson lends itself to flipped classroom, but it's definitely something that's catching on. There was a recent study, I guess 2 days ago, that came out that suggested about 10% of college classrooms were flipped as of now. And certainly I think that is a way of using greater access to video to bring greater engagement to education, right? To take some of the things that technology has to offer and use it to improve the classroom. Now, there isn't any data about how much this is being used in the K-12 arena yet, but given the excitement around this topic, I suspect we will see a lot more of it. And so then we asked K-12 teachers about kids and searching, and they are not impressed. They are not impressed by what their students are doing. Generally, they have a pretty negative assessment of their students' ability to do research using technology. They think it's creating distraction. They think the amount of information is really overwhelming and that students don't have good ways to filter through it, which I think that applies to a lot of people, adults as well. I think they think that it's conditioning students to think that searching is easy. Oh, I can just find it like that. I don't actually have to work hard to find information and to do the research for my project. Again, the distraction element is really huge. Teachers point to it. And I'm sure I would love to hear, for those of you who are in in the classroom here, both as students and as instructors. What is your experience with that? Do you find that your students are distracted? Does it annoy you when you walk around in the lecture and you see that somebody's bought those really cute shoes on Zappos while you were talking about that really awesome thing that you were sharing? And teachers also think this discourages wider use of resources. It forces people to just be more narrow, like, oh, if it's not on Google, it doesn't matter. And then it makes it harder to find credible materials. All that said, teachers do have a positive sense about technology in the classroom. It's really a mixed message. Teachers feel very, very mixed about this in their lives. So they say it gives students access to a wider range of resources, which seems reasonable. They say it makes students more self-sufficient in their research. And they think it has a mostly positive impact on student research habits. So it's a little bit at odds. We're getting a lot of different messages from teachers. They're not always clear about what they think and feel about about how students are really doing things in the classroom. So I think the real takeaway, and so this is my last slide, or my second to last slide, is what is it left? What do you as a campus just take away from this? What are some of the things that are really here? And for me, some of these are questions and some of these are thoughts, and I would love to actually have this be a conversation and hear about what you think. I think technology really changes our relationship to place. The mobile phone changes how we interact and orient in space and how we expect to have access to information. But there's a fundamental lure of a residential college for a lot of people, and I don't think that's going to go away. I think there is something to be said about being in a community of learning around other sort of people who are with different experiences, but perhaps of like minds, at least in terms of their interest in sort of the intellectual endeavors. That's not going to go away. But the college, I think, would owe it to itself to continue to engage in practices that put different people together, counteract the forces of social media, and put people in physical space together who are different, because that's really, really important to society, not just for even just the college campus, but it's important. And I think the learners who are coming, going to continue to come to you over the next 5 years, they're going to keep being changed, right? The next, and this is my last slide. So this is Catherine. Catherine is 8 months old. She will be in college 17 years from now. What will her experience be like? She won't remember a world without Snapchat. She won't remember a world without Tumblr, without Pinterest, without any of these technologies we've talked about today. What's going to be different for her? And how much will you move to meet them? And how much will you say what we have to offer is actually efficient and special? And that part of the college experience is coming to that. I think there needs to be a conversation there. I wouldn't suggest chucking everything, because there's so much of value in the ways we've been teaching people for many, many years. And I think we don't want to lose that. But the question is how much do you move to meet them? And then our, MOOCs, we talk about these massive online open courses. Are they the new textbooks? Is this how we're going to kind of deliver baseline information instead of lectures? And then actually, are MOOCs going to help us flip the classroom, really? That's a question that I talked about at my dinner table last night. And we were wondering, is this what the future is? And I should say that my husband is the managing editor of the Chronicle of Higher Education, so he thinks about this a lot too. And then finally, how are you going to manage the difficulties of distraction? That's hard. It's hard. And I think you're not putting the genie back in the bottle. You're not going to take these devices out of the classroom. If you lock them down, you're doing exactly what the K12 schools are doing with not so great results. So figuring out how to harness the promise, the opportunities of bringing these devices into the classroom while managing the distractions and the risks, right? I mean, I talked with some folks from your Dean of Students office who work with first-year students, and we talked about kind of the explosion of the student who kind of has been locked down by parents and schools and comes to this place of freedom and can't really deal. And what do you do about the ways in which that can be manifest digitally, whether that's going down the rabbit hole of World of Warcraft games or into online pornography? And those are real challenges, and I'm not sure I have the answers. But I'm really interested in hearing what you think about this and what your experience are like, what you see in your own classrooms and your own experiences in your own lives. So thank you so much. And I'll leave you the picture of the cake later. So. I would love to. Please, if anybody has any. Yes.
So President Folk said you were an anthropology and English major, and presumably you learned to think about problems. What's happening to the ability of students to think about things, given the onslaught of walking around with your phone and talking to people all the time, as opposed to walking around and thinking about something?
Can you repeat the question?
Yeah. Sure. He was asking about what is the impact of all this technology on students' abilities to think about things, right? Think deeply about things. Yeah, I'm of the opinion, and this is my own sort of personal sort of way of thinking based on my research, is that I don't think that the technology. I think the technology changes a lot of the ways in which we are able to view things, the ways in which we have challenges to deal with. I don't think it changes the essential way of being in the world. It might. I think the real issue would be around the shortening of communication, that brevity, and that students are more attracted to shorter forms of communication right now. So there's less long form and more short form, and the ways in which that changes your relationship to information and your tolerance for long texts. But I think that's actually, that's culture-wide. I mean, if you look at how we cut our movies. Watch a movie from the early 80s. We do this with my kids at home. My husband and I, we inflict old movies on our kids, and they're like, ugh. But it's amazing how slow the beginning of movies are. It's amazing the ways in which, you know, the cuts are so, they're long, the shots are long, the pacing is different. We've really accelerated advertisements, MTV, music, the length of music, it's everywhere. A lot of things about our culture are faster and shorter than they used to be. And so I wouldn't necessarily blame technology for that. And I'm also of the mind that I think the technology, again, I don't feel that it fundamentally works to change the brain. Other people disagree with me on that. I think you've had speakers, in fact, who disagree with me on that. But that's my experience. I certainly know many teens who I've talked to who are smart, deep-thinking kids you would love to have in your class or in your life. And there's plenty of other kids who you would not. And I don't think that their use of technology is necessarily why they are that way. Yes, and then we'll take some of you.
I'm just curious, you said in terms of the K12 learning that it was a good thing that students and teachers were texting conversations. Why is it a good thing that they're texting conversations and not having conversations?
Oh, I mean, I think that the use of text in the classroom can be, it can be done a lot of different ways. I think that's just a creative use of text to bring into the classroom. I don't actually think that teachers and students are texting literal conversations back and forth, unless it's a device as a part of a lesson that would be short-lived. I don't think that teachers are expecting to have long types of communication with students in that way. So in that regard, I'm talking about texting used for very specific educational purposes. And it might be that I'm asking a question. Like, I have a really question about the homework, and I don't know how to answer it, and my teacher says, text me between this hour and I'll get back to you.
Okay, so outside of the class, I thought you were talking about
it actually could be any of that. It could be any of that. And so the wording of the question, I believe, is in class or to complete assignments. And so I suppose that could be that I'm texting to answer a question that helps me complete an assignment. But for the most part, the question is designed to try to get at more direct educational purposes, and that's what I'm applauding, not necessarily moving all communication between teachers and students to a text-based. No, no. So. Yes?
So your opening slide featured a gentleman who had earbuds in, and I'm surprised that you didn't talk about the technology of music as radically changing people. So stereo headphones, MP3s, Napster, iPods.
I actually have a longer version of this talk, which I did not inflict upon you because I realized it would take me 75 minutes to deliver it. And in fact, it probably did take about that amount of time. But yes, it is absolutely radical in terms of business models around music, in terms of the ways we interact in space and the ways we, absolutely. Right. I chose not to include it because it didn't have quite the good hook into education other than music education, and so that's part of why I didn't include it. I mean, certainly listening to lectures is something that could happen, but it didn't seem to have as close a connection. But I have plenty of slides I'd be happy to share with you about that.
Well, the reason I add it is because you talk about distraction, and that's part of that piece.
Yeah. No, I think you're absolutely right. That's a great point. Thanks. Yes.
I really liked at the end when you talked about, I think, being intentional about the ways the current classroom interacts with technology. So I think the way we have been framing technology has often been MOOCs or no MOOCs.
Yeah.
Technology or no technology. And really what it is how do we take the best of what we're doing and either use technology to be better or where might technology do something better and different than we can currently do, and where doesn't it? So how are we going to be intentional about these kinds of questions rather than MOOCs, not MOOCs, or whatever that is? And so I'd like to hear your thoughts.
No, I think that's absolutely the way to go. And certainly thinking about, when you think about, we had this conversation earlier, and thinking about how do you decide what technology to adopt? Let's say you're a school, maybe you're a K12 school, maybe you're a university, and you're like, we know we want to bring more of this in because it engages our students. What do we do? Where do we invest? And that's a really hard question. But I think figuring out where to invest where it maximizes the educational purpose, right? That it's not just about taking something that's like not that great of a way to teach somebody something, like let's just keep doing drills over and over again on mimeographed, photocopied sheets. You can take that and you can put that on the internet, and that's not going to do much for you. But you can also take a skill and you could build it into a game and have that be, and have a game platform teach something. I'm not suggesting that necessarily building game platforms is a way to invest well in a school environment, but certainly acknowledging the devices that your students already have and building and investing in ways that harness that rather than necessarily investing in hardware seems like a better, software, not hardware, seems like a better use to me. You can ask people to buy certain kinds of hardware. I mean, colleges have been doing that for a while. Like, here's the less expensive laptop you can purchase when you're a freshman. And that's by way of sort of shaping the technological choices of your freshman class or your first year class. And so, figuring out how you want to invest in, maybe investing in networks is the way to do it. But certainly acknowledging and not duplicating what's already coming into your classroom in your students' backpacks is what I would suggest.
I was really interested when you're talking about, I love the idea to think about how social network either reinforces a lack of diversity in your life or and that you might want to, in construction of your living circumstances, increase it. But I wondered, I have to think a little bit of a challenge to that too, because most kids, especially younger kids, aren't really living in particularly diverse areas. We talk to our students, their classes aren't nearly as diverse even when they come to college, but the social network, the YouTube, all these things basically make them feel conversant with kids all around the world. So have you done much work to look and see, that sort of, there's one thing about who you text personally, but then there's other about how they access a global world. And is there are we getting any understanding about whether they're opening doors for themselves or are they actually closing doors with that social?
That's a great question. We've looked at that amongst adults. And adults, I think youth are actually better in some ways at, as you say, engaging with other people through media as it's available to them. I don't necessarily think in terms of the networks that they construct in social media sites, particularly because many youth have if I don't know you personally, I won't friend you. So again, it reproduces their kind of physical networks. Those can be very, very big. And some teens don't have that. Oh, she's cute. Okay, yeah, I'll accept. So I think in those networks where they spend a lot of time and they build relationships, I think those tend to be more like who they grow up with, what their community is like. And if you live in a diverse community, then that could be a very diverse network. If you don't, it's not. I do think that through other media, though I think it tends to be more one way, I think the ways in which you would actually interact with people different from you would be through digital spaces that kids are often discouraged from being in, like chat spaces or spaces around, it's a lot of what Mimi Ito was talking about, spaces around creation, around fan fiction or games or sort of areas of practice that are very interesting. That's actually where teens can have this great opportunity to become experts and be respected for what they know as opposed to their age. And that's a way they can engage with people who are quite different. But a lot of times they get discouraged from going there by people who think you're going to meet somebody who's bad, you're going to talk to strangers, it's dangerous, don't go. And so I think that's hard. I do think that there's absolutely more of a kind of a one-way consumptive experience around global. Like I can watch the video from this guy in Korea and these people in Africa and people who are very different from me and who are from different parts of the world, but I don't know how personal that really is. So, and with adults, we see that you tend to create networks of people who think similarly to you. People who are really into information and particularly into politics often do go to find out what the other side thinks and will engage with that material, but most people tend to stick with the people that they know. So, yes?
Our students are really connected, but they also seem really hungry for real face time and for community, maybe possibly more so than they ever have been, although I can't base on any data. I wonder if you have any examples of things that you're excited about where institutions are using technology to actually bring people together for actual face time in creative ways. Are there things that you're really psyched about, or are you not seeing those things yet? People creatively using apps or various types of technology to have people interact in a setting like ours in new ways.
I will say that my experience with the higher education realm is more limited, and the K12 arena is not really doing that very much, at least not that I know of. And again, that's not, it's entirely possible that I don't know about it. I think there's really interesting stuff around big gaming, which if people don't know what it is, it's games that kind of exist in space, and you use mobile technology to kind of, it's almost like a treasure hunt, scavenger hunt, and it can bring people together all around this concept of a game in a community or in a space. That's really interesting to me as a way of bringing people together using technology in real time. But I would actually love to hear more from you about that, because I don't actually know about a lot of those, and that's a great question. So yeah, in the back.
Well, I can answer some of that.
Great.
I teach third grade at White River School, which is down the road in the town of Hartford. And the town of Hartford got a grant for somebody within it, the school system. And we have 2 classrooms in every elementary school, and we have digital classrooms. So we have a combination of iPads, netbooks, iPods. And so we are actually doing Google Hangouts with, different classes, like 3rd grade, 1st grade, on the continuum, like maybe I'm doing the solar system, and they're doing it at a higher level in 5th grade. So, we, try to do interactive things as well. One of the 4th grade teachers is doing trying to do some flipped classrooms. So people are doing it. It just depends on your bandwidth and dedication to that. And one of the things that we do that has been stressed, because I've been taking classes on expanding my learning and implementing it, and I didn't hear you mention, is digital citizenship. And it's really important. And we have to give lessons on digital citizenship. Everything that you post is there forever, can be copied, can be spread, and all of that. And just being kind and respectful and responsible using digital literacy.
That's a great point, and it's a huge issue. We actually did my most recent past piece of work was about that exact topic. It was called Teens, and it was basically about kindness and cruelty online. So it looked both at kind of meanness and cruelty, drama, but also roughly digital citizenship, looking mostly at the lens of kind of what parents often identify as bullying interactions. So not quite really what you're talking, I think, almost as much about media literacy as kind of how to be a good person online. And those are both really important topics, yeah. Yeah.
I teach high school locally at Kimball Union, and we're all in tech-wise.
Great.
But interestingly, I think thoughtfully, but for example, I teach language, modern language. So last year, we looked at the impact of the printing press on the Reformation, and we looked at the impact of social media on the Arab Spring.
Cool.
And we tried to draw some conclusions between the two.
Yeah.
And the thing we came up with was that social media, we think, accelerated change that was going to happen anyway, but it made it come faster.
Yeah.
So so here I am listening to you thinking, well, okay, so all this new stuff is probably accelerating change that probably would have happened anyway, but here we are in the education system, it's going very fast. And my question to you is, do you think it's an acceleration, or do you think it's actually the car leading, like starting to lead the way? Like actually these technologies are starting to change the way we do things.
Yeah. I mean, I do think that there is certainly an the rate of change is accelerating. There's really fabulous curve. I think it's called Metcalfe's law, that it really applies to computing power, but it applies to a lot of things. It's this curve that shows the rate of change and the rate of sort of increase in speed. The rate of it really is increasing. So it's not your imagination. And I do think that there is certainly a sense that learning needed to change, and that this technology is certainly leading the way, but I do think it's leading the way and it's going faster. And I think institutions as a whole have a difficult time sometimes with change, particularly large institutions that have a large history, have a long history, like the high school, like the college. And so I think sometimes change can be difficult, and these technologies are forcing change, I think, at rates that are probably more uncomfortable than they have been in the past. So I don't know if that answers your question, but.
What I'd like to do is, before we thank Amit, I want to let you know that we have refreshments outside, so we'd love people to stay and continue that conversation, but I want to let her have a chance to get something for a drink, because she's been giving us such attention for quite a while, and so please join me in thanking her. And